publishing outlandish hoaxes as actual academic papers, next on Campus Roundup. Hi, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is the Campus Roundup at the College Fix. Our top story segment today focuses on academic publishing on college campuses, specifically professors writing fake papers, one more ridiculous than the next, and trying to get them passed off as real research. To talk more about this, we welcome Autumn Berend, a student at Portland State University and a journalist for the College Fix. Autumn, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me again.
Please talk a little bit about the hoax. What actually happened there?
So what happened is it started with a few other projects with Dr. James Lindsay and Dr. Peter Boghossian at Portland State University, one of them from Portland State University, decided to write a hoax paper after reading the feminist glaciology paper, in which they decided, we could probably expose the lack of credibility, the lack of rigor, and the lack of scholarly work put into these works. So they decided to start off with an idea called the sexist potato. From that, they decided that there were already too many papers already regarding potatoes and sexism from my interview. So they decided to take things on a grander scale after writing that paper and gained criticism. And they decided to start off with things like the conceptual penis, and later on they grew up to the point of the dog park one with Helen Pluckrose.
Now, you actually had a chance to talk to some of the authors. Talk a little bit about them. What were they like when you talked to them, and were they pretty approachable?
They were very approachable. They were very casual. It was actually in the backyard of one of their houses. The dogs that were actually one of their dogs was actually the tools used that originally brought the idea of the dog park.
Now, these professors aren't Christian conservatives, right? They're not right-wingers. They're fairly middle-of-the-road liberal professors, right?
Correct. One of them is actually a well-known atheist liberal professor at Portland State University, Peter Boghossian. I would classify him as probably like a classical liberal, but yeah, none of them are Christian conservatives. Most of them, if not all of them, are on the left side of the spectrum, and yet they still went ahead and did this whole rigorous test in order to show how flawed the academic system was.
What did they tell you was their primary end game? What did they hope would happen from these experiments?
They wanted, in short, they wanted papers to have more rigor to them. They wanted to be truly an academic, an intellectually diverse atmosphere, something that accepts papers based off of what's being done in terms of the studies, in terms of the evidence, and in terms of the academia. However, in some of them, they did say that one of the issues that they learned was that they're not actually the publication in question is actually not going to change the way they did things. They're just going to make sure that people are more sincere, which Helen Pluckrose mentioned to me that, well, if we were more sincere, why couldn't we just, would our papers still be published?
Well, that's a great point. What does sincerity have to do with academic research? You could be the most sincere Nazi in the world. You're still a Nazi, right? How did the professors react when they were hit with the charge of sincerity moving forward? We're not going to change our policies. We're just going to seek greater sincerity.
I would say that I read disappointment on them. It wasn't the point that they were trying to get across. I feel like they personally made clear points as to what the papers were supposed to prove, and I think the academic publication in question decided to not take this chance to improve themselves, and instead decided to say, you know what, we'll just see if they're more sincere, and then we'll publish the work. In which case, you could say potatoes are sexist because they're potatoes, and as long as you're sincere about it, they're going to publish it probably.
That's right. And so basically nothing has changed. They're doubling down the academic presses. They're more than willing to publish articles like that. They just want to make sure that the authors really mean them. They're not just making it up. Somehow, if you believe the hoax, it's not a hoax anymore. Did they mention any possibility of blowback from their schools or from academia in general for these hoaxes?
Absolutely. One of them wanted to actually go into a PhD program. She is not sure that it's going to happen now, and if she doesn't get accepted into, or she can't get into a PhD program from a university, there is the fear that it may have ties to the fact of her doing this. James Lindsay didn't really say, he didn't feel much blowback other than social media criticism. he's not afraid someone's going to punch him in the face because he lives in the southeast. Peter Boghossian, however, there was a fear of possibly losing his job. There's also the fear of possibly being punched in the face. During this time when we were doing the interview, there was actually a protest to disarm the Portland State Portland State University campus armed police. And in order to get to his office, he had to actually go right by the occupation. And so it was just kind of this fear if he was going to be attacked, because he was actually at a local bar not long ago where he was actually threatened, from what he told me. And so the other thing that they're afraid of is that they're all going to be permanently banned from academic publishing from now on.
Well, it was remarkable, isn't it, that when university professors demonstrate that the publishing industry is driven primarily by ideology and not by academic rigor, you have actual students of that university, it seems, protesting the hoaxers, not protesting the journal. As somebody who goes to school on that campus, would you say that's an ethos that is a great percentage of the student body there, or is that just a small number?
I honestly can't say, since it's hard to tell without actual poll data, but I would say, knowing Portland State University, it's probably a good guess, a good educated guess, that it's shared, the ethos is shared by many of the students that, you know what, the professors did nothing, or the professors did something wrong. They basically poked holes at something serious, and, you know, just overall that the professors didn't do anything correct, I would say, is probably a good educated guess.
Autumn Barron, great work you've done there. We appreciate that at the College Fix, and we certainly hope to see you again soon, very soon. Keep up the great work. All right, now I want to shift to Talking Campus, our weekly discussion with members of the College Fix editorial team. Today, I'm joined by College Fix Associate Editor Greg Piper to continue our conversation about hoaxes in academic publishing. Greg, welcome to the program today.
Thanks for having me.
You wrote a really great article about the nature of these hoaxes and how actually conservative, liberal philosophers, liberal mathematicians now, fed up with the anti-evidence publication culture of American universities, are providing hoax articles that are getting picked up and published. Talk a little bit about the story as you understand it from a broad perspective.
Sure. So these folks had done this once before. James Lindsay and Peter Boghossian, they had been kind of annoyed by, it seems like, the pretty lax standards around getting something completely incomprehensible published. They wrote a paper called The Conceptual Penis as a Social Construct, and got it published in a fairly low quality journal. And they had submitted it in such a way that they thought it would be incomprehensible, but they got really glowing reviews back during peer review. And they decided that was a little too easy. Let's actually go for kind of the cream of the crop of these academic journals here. Let's write in a way that mimics exactly what kind of papers they would be accepting, but let's come up with kind of the most ludicrous ideas we can. And one of these came from Peter Boghossian's own life. He has dogs. He goes to the dog park. And they decided, why don't we say that rape culture is rife at dog parks, and we can learn some lessons about how to treat actual human males by how we kind of train dogs not to sexually assault each other.
You know, just sitting here listening to this, as a professor myself, why am I not the least bit surprised that got published? The idea that you can equate human beings, human males, and dogs would never fly if you were trying to argue that women could be trained like dogs. But somehow when you talk about subordinating men to collars and leashes and all kinds of conditioning exercises, that flies right in the wheelhouse of what our kids are getting taught every day on college campuses.
It really does fit in with kind of what they're exposed to in college, this idea that men are so kind of irredeemable that we need to treat them like animals who really don't have kind of like their own free will and their own ability to reason. So it's not really terribly unusual. You really just have to take an existing framework like rape culture and toxic masculinity and expand it to something that's kind of familiar, that's part of everyday life. And then people think, oh, why haven't we seen this comparison before? This makes so much intuitive sense. It really shows us kind of a way to move forward and a different way to think about this with the context we're familiar with. But if you just tell this to a normal person outside of a college campus, they're going to be really flummoxed by it and wonder, has anyone with common sense actually looked at this? Have you thought about, was this a hoax? And there were a lot of people wondering when this paper did get published, was this a hoax? It looked really suspicious. The author couldn't be tracked down. There was every reason to think that this was just a massive prank, but nobody paid attention to it during a review. Everybody just thought this was a brilliant idea. because they live in kind of these narrow academic bubbles where common sense has long ago been dismissed.
You know, that not only did the authors hoax these journals, they took it a little bit further. For one of the journals, they actually wrote an article in which they basically paraphrased an argument from Hitler's Mein Kampf and threw in some social justice jargon. That was a ballsy move, wasn't it? And talk about how Adolf Hitler now, if you just throw in a couple of PC phrasings, is fair game for a progressive academic article.
I think that was the most impressive one they did. They had said they'd switched out some of Mein Kampf and put in some social justice buzzwords in there just to make it look like something that actually would appear in a regular academic journal in 2018. And if you look at some of the language, it's really kind of a screed. It's talking in this very kind of extreme. We must accomplish our mission at all costs. That every possible sacrifice must be made for this, so we can achieve true justice. That some people may find this is they aren't able to actually go through with all of this, but those people must make every sacrifice possible. We won't have justice for women otherwise. We won't break our chains. We won't truly be free. And this doesn't sound terribly different than what you're hearing at kind of your average campus women's center, that we have to make every sacrifice. We must fight completely because women won't be free until we have made every sacrifice. We have completely defeated our enemies. We have to succeed at all costs. There's not really a kind of incremental approach here to improving the climate for women, for making them more equal to men in different ways. There's not really any kind of patience for a democratic process, for a slow political process here. It is the language of revolution, and this just wasn't all that unusual for these people who really have not been part of any kind of revolution. They don't know what a revolution is. They are safely cloistered in their ivory towers, just kind of talking about all this stuff. So they haven't had, let's say, the real world experience of someone in Venezuela who knows what a revolution is like and exactly how jarring and destructive it is. So it's not really all that surprising that people who have never experienced this in their own life just think it's kind of a normal way to think about feminism.
Last quick question for you, Greg. You are an editor for The College Fix. You guys carefully edit all your journalistic pieces. What has happened to editing on college campuses? I mean, it's one thing to be a professor, be a little extreme, but isn't it the job of editors to catch that and fix it before it becomes the level of a hoax like this?
I think so. I think one of the issues is that you have these fairly narrow bubbles of people who are trying not to kind of step outside what is considered to be the acceptable zone of discourse here. When you see them actually raise objections, they tend to be stated very mildly and meekly. I'll tell you myself, I have very thorough arguments sometimes with my students over exactly what they say actually happened, making sure that we vet it to make sure the facts are straight, that they're not going to jump into conclusions or misreading something. And I feel like there's just not really kind of a culture of give and take in some of these places. Not all academic journals for sure, but some of those within this kind of field of grievance studies, as the Hoax folks have described it, to really push back hard against some of these assertions, to say this may not be all that credible. I mean, you could also make the argument that some of these things that are being studied don't really lend themselves well to falsifiability to the kind of traditional scientific method, and so they already kind of cleared that hurdle. They're not the kind of traditional research that we think about. They're things that just kind of state a conclusion and assume it.
Yeah, these presses and publishers now on the academic side of things, for them, ideology is evidence. Evidence gets in the way of ideology. Greg Piper, it has been a great pleasure to speak with you again today. Thanks for your time. The real problem here, as always, is not with this handful of hoaxes. The fact that you can get some of these outlandish arguments, these outlandish papers published in mainstream university presses is hardly surprising. The real problem is, though, however, what this does to research beyond the hoaxes. The level at which ideology is the defining reason why we publish in the humanities should worry us all. Because we're publishing things now across the humanities, across the social sciences now. We really have to worry about the sciences moving forward. But we're publishing things now that are primarily political agitprop. And the more outlandish, the more excessive the outrage, the more likely it is to get published. I remember once, I'm a professor of Renaissance literature, I remember writing an article and sending it off to one of the premier journals in my field, Renaissance Studies. And I got a letter back from the editor, and the editor said, you know, the three outside peer reviewers we sent this to loved your work. They thought it was historically sound. They thought you make a fantastic case. However, she said, we are not going to publish your article in our journal because it is not feminist enough. Now, this was an article that had nothing to do with feminism. Feminism didn't exist in the Renaissance. I was actually, silly me, writing about Renaissance topics. And I was told by my editor, if I had more feminism and perhaps less historical context, they might have published me. And that sort of says it all. The real danger here is we saw the humanities fall. We've seen the social sciences fall. Already they're beginning to chip away at empiricism and the scientific method, holdovers of white privilege in the sciences. When the sciences fall, there'll be nothing left but propaganda. That's what we have to fight. And that's the final fix. Be sure to stay up on all the latest news and information from the College Fix by joining us on all of our social media platforms. With the Campus Roundup, I'm Dr. Duke, and we will see you next time.